So you talked about 2G and 3G, but so many smartphones today have Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, which both are inherently very insecure. So, if you turn on your Bluetooth, you can find plenty of phones that are unprotected, and they don't even ask the user do they want to connect, and you compare it to them. You go into a Wi-Fi hotspot, and it's not an AT&T Starbucks, it's Joe's Coffee Shop, and you've got your phone on Wi-Fi. So, who cares about whether 2G and 3G are secure? What are we doing about these other technologies?
So, of course, as we look at these devices, they're trying to enable data sharing or data movement. And every time you allow for that, you open up a new threat vector. So, again, taking a layered approach to security is in the applications that you employ. So if you do have applications that do share, notifying the user, potentially authorizing the movement of that data. So there's some level of control that the applications can provide. From the device perspective, if you have a device management entity on that device, you can enforce certain type of security policies that would lock down those vectors, those threat vectors, for specific applications, for specific. If you're communicating to the backend system, you make sure that a VPN connection is established, so that there's another layer of security even when there's other connection points open.
I think it gets to the point of the end user and enforcing policy upon them. And so you got to really take an end-to-end approach of establishing the right policy. Who can have access to what data from what device and what network type, and then applying those policies via tools like MDM or whatever, and doing the multi-factor authentications that we referred to. So you really need to look at it holistically. So on that particular device, who is that end user, and what is the sensitivity of the data that they have access to that could be on that device? And then make your choices. Do I lock it down? Do I disallow the use of those Bluetooth and Wi-Fi through policy enforcement through tools? Or do I just take care of it through multi-factor authentication?
So I'm going to maybe drop a truism, but just assume that the network is malicious. And what I mean by that is following on Bill's original point that the chances of something going over a GSM network and someone actually intercepting it are low. But put on SSL anyway. It's actually strictly from a throughput perspective, it's an AT&T or Verizon's advantage. If they have a hotspot nearby, if they can offload you onto that, it opens up the network for other users, right? Comment about the Braves game. If they could just offload everybody onto Wi-Fi, and then those users who really needed the cellular connection could use it, it would be better, performance-wise, for all of us. So if you have SSL, if you have VPN, those sorts of things are just the smart way to operate. Assume that you're being watched, you're being listened to, not the network, I don't mean the provider, but somebody else listening on that network is indeed malicious.
And to the Falcon Stadium actually has free Wi-Fi. Braves do not.
Hey guys, with all the news about foreign entities performing cyber attacks, the pressing question in my mind is, to what extent do private entities here in the U.S. should or currently cooperate with government entities to think about security, not only from the enterprise level, but also from a national security perspective? I wonder if you have any comments on that.
Oh, that's a very good question. So I was actually recently at the India Security Symposium. Over there, organizations operating individually recognize that when you're playing defense, you have to be vigilant every minute, right? But if you're playing offense, in the sense of the hacker, you pick your target, you pick the time, you pick the location, and you can potentially accrue resources to overwhelm the person who's defending. So better sharing of information across CIOs, CISOs becomes very important, because defense takes a lot more effort, a lot more awareness of what's happening. What we're seeing from a threat landscape perspective is more targeted because of how people are responding. The traditional approach is you identify an attack or a threat, and you develop a countermeasure. So and in order to build a countermeasure, you have to know have awareness that this type of attack exists. So attackers, what they're doing is they're attacking very specific individuals, entities, or demographics, and then reversing it, flaying, Stuxnet, and others, right? So, but allowing information collaboration across organizations, and one of the problems that we have in that context is if you admit that you might actually, there are fines, there might be regulatory issues. So I think that regime has to change to allow for more sharing of information.
And the important point is, yes, so take those into consideration, and you need to educate and arm yourselves also as an enterprise, representative. So the foreign institutions, the NSA, the think tanks, they all are issuing very careful guidance and identifying risks that you should be aware of, things that are trending differently. So there's a tremendous amount of unclassified information that they actually purposely release in a manner so that it can be consumed that reflect some of the risks that they have seen in other spaces and other more sensitive classifications of data. So definitely take advantage of that. I think we have another question, and then we'll go through. Sir?
Question regarding encryption, file protection, etc. Encryption on devices, once you're through the initial password, it's an open free game. You transfer files out. There's no real protection at all of your data on your device, and even getting through the basic encryption is not necessarily that hard if you have the right tools. So what is really the answer? Because the encryption on devices is more kind of like security at the airport, where it's more for show than for real. So what's the answer moving forward? Because there's obvious reasons why things like the 3GPP and the email and all that stuff hasn't been adopted, because it's a pain in the rear end. So what's the answer moving forward?
I think a lot of it was discussed during the course of the panel. It's building the apps with security in mind, encrypting the data, making sure if it's stored locally, it's encrypted. It's deploying container technologies that actually lock down anything inside that container. It can't be transferred out of that container. And so there are tools that are there and are evolving, but I think it really comes down a lot to the app development side of things.
There is, and there's an evolution that's happening in those tool set providers called App Wrapper. This isn't my company this time. So it is taking things like a Dynamics or Fixed Mode or Visitor Mobile and sort of inverting the model. So instead of providing a container app that provides access to your email and Safari or web browsing, and maybe address and calendar, and then all the other applications that you need, it inverts it and says, all right, again, you have the app metaphor of I have those apps on my my device, and I can use them independently like I do today outside of the enterprise, but they have the same level of SSO and security as that container. And so that's sort of one step of the evolution. The next step of the evolution is then be able to take an existing application that wasn't written with security in mind and then secure it. And so those are maturing and coming to market, and we'll see how well they work and how strong they work in there, but they are coming, and there are options to the traditional, let's say traditional. Containers have been around, what, 2 years now? 3?
Yeah, maybe.
Container models, so they are definitely evolving on that.
So first off, I want to thank you very much for everybody's questions. We're going to go into our closing remarks here, and then if you will lock the doors, you'll be able to ask the panel any questions you want once the camera's off, and then get more detail. So Patrick, you lead us off first, and then we'll just go down left to right.
Certainly. So I didn't get to, I talked about SSL and authentication, but again, one of the things I want to stress to all of you is that one of the biggest problems you all face is simple authentication over the phone. Who on earth is it that you're talking to on the other end? And I don't mean when your buddy or your wife or your husband calls you up. I'm talking about when another organization with tens of thousands of people calls you. How is it that you can actually identify them. We've tried to lock down a browser on many platforms, and we have, if you're an expert anyway, good mechanisms to help you do that process. On the phone, on traditional telephony calls, we don't have that yet. So all of you should be paying attention to this vector as something that's critical for securing mobile and your own company.
So Patrick, thank you for kind of reading the question that I forgot to ask and enable the panel with this. What is the one tip that you would recommend everybody walk out of here with? So,
And the one tip I'll repeat again is assume the network is malicious.
thank you.
So closing thoughts for me, the way that I approach security is more about risk management. It's contextual awareness of the presence of the information, or the presence of the consuming that information on what device, on what network, in what location is that individual, or potentially that machine. What is it, the information that you're trying to either protect or provide, and depending on the scenario. So security is a very complex problem. So start thinking about it more of as a risk management solution of, this is information I need to protect at all costs, this is information that I should strongly protect, this is information that should be publicly available. And as you start to dissect those contextual awareness of the data, the solutions start to reveal themselves a little bit more more easily. But taking the idea that security is solved with a single hammer, it'd have to be a really large hammer, and it won't work. And so that's kind of the mindset you have to apply to this very, very complex problem.
Yeah, so that was great, Chris. Oh, you stole my answer, but I think if the other thing that I look at is take a look at when you're trying to solve a problem, the operational priorities. The operational priorities, you have to balance security with what you're trying to do or enable. At the end of the day, if security becomes a burden, two things will happen. There will be non-participation, or people will try to find ways around it. And this is especially true in enterprises. So how can you employ context to deliver one of two things? When you deliver security, you're bartering inconvenience. So you have to show value in that context. So it employs the ability to deliver value that people recognize and in that context. And since you don't have a silver bullet, try to employ multiple different types of capabilities, whether it's app security, device security, user security, to address your operational priority.
So what I would say is that you want to start with a plan, and a holistic end-to-end plan. And that plan needs to involve the policies, the people, the mode of access, the information in the applications, and the infrastructure through which they're going to access those. And you got to think through the use cases of which users can have what information, where, and when, and how, and secure it in multiple layers, from the device, from the device all the way through the back-end systems. And every step in every one of those things, like you said, assume that the network is malicious, secure it in every one of those places. And then I would say, just assume the user is ignorant and build your systems and your applications to allow for it. And I don't mean that they're not stupid, they just are ignorant about the risk. So you have to secure it for them.
So first up, I want to thank our panel for joining us today. We asked a lot of great questions. You guys on Twitter give us plenty of information to help. After the meeting adjourns, please do ask lots of questions and kind of follow up with us. Just want to add a closing remark here. When we see a lot of organizations that are focused on this challenge, the number one approach is first understanding. Like, seek to understand the business reason these devices are serving your organization. Then work on the justification as to how you can protect them and enable them through channels. So when you focus it in that regard, continuous, regular review of the environment, of understanding what the wireless devices are that impact your business. Now, obviously, if you're in the medical field, you would, be concerned with the FTC's, or FCC's publication on medical device and who's responsible, the manufacturer, the device administrator, the hospital, when it comes to the wireless devices that exist and the radio frequencies. If you're in another sphere, the energy sector, you've got the smart grids and those technologies with the NERC and BERC, and there's a lot of interesting guidance there. And as you look across industry, focus on that. So think about the canvas of what's happening. It's important to regularly review. Too often, devices and technology will be updated with additional opportunities in them that enable us, that are so seamless, sometimes we forget that they're there. And if you'll note, I'm on the new iPhone, it's iPhone 5, and so everybody's like, oh, well, the new thing's already out, it's the Samsung, right? But be mindful in that all the devices that are coming out, all devices, any platform, they are all adding different opportunities, different technologies for your business to enable, for you to enable your teams and your clients and your customers. But all those individually create an ecosystem that we have to be mindful of. So I just want to thank you very much. Then we have some closing remarks, sir.